Morgen, guten Tag, guten Abend. Ich bin Eric Miscoll, der Publisher von EMSNOW, und willkommen zur virtual Eric Miscoll Show. And that's as far as we're going in German on this one, but I'd start that way because our guests today are both in Germany, and we'll be addressing taking some time and speak about the EMS industry in Europe. Our guests today are Manfred Amberger, the Senior Vice President with Zollner Electronics, one of the largest EMS in the world. And also, we are revisited by Dieter Weiss, the market researcher extraordinaire from Informa. And as always, we have Philip Stoten, my co-host, joining us from Australia. So, gentlemen, thank you all for joining us here today. Quick housekeeping, I would just say that anybody of our visitors, if you have guests, you are on mute. So if you have questions, please pose them in the question tab at the bottom of the screen, should be at the bottom of your screen. And we are recording this show and we'll be rebroadcasting it probably within the week, no doubt. So as I said, our focus today is really on the EMS industry in Europe, what's happening. And there's some good stories there, and I think both of these gentlemen can help shed some light on that. So why don't we begin, though, with Manfred, why don't I begin with you and just ask you to give a brief introduction to yourself and to Zollner for those who may not be fully knowledgeable of who you are.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, Eric. Zollner is amongst the top 15 EMS providers globally, but in terms of family-owned, we are the largest one. The largest EMS, so we have around 11,500 people and serving nearly all the different industries like automotive, medical, data technology, and so on. And our locations are I would say, in the important regions in the world.
Yep.
To myself, I'm one of the older Zollner employees, so I started in '84 already. With different positions in different countries. And so since end of 2014, I'm responsible for the marketing and sales group for the Zollner globally.
Good, excellent. Dieter.
Yes.
Good morning. Brief introduction to you, sir.
Well, I'm market researcher and analyst for many years. I've been working in the electronics industry for a total of 42 years. And for the last 5 years, I focused on establishing a new brand called Informa, Information for Manufacturers, to serve the European, in the majority, the European EMS industry, helping them with reliable and good numbers so they can do a professional and better market planning and strategy.
Okay, thank you. Let's start off maybe more general, and we can get into some more specific issues as we move forward here. Manfred, why don't we start with you, and maybe, you know, if you can kind of characterize how is Zollner's business going? You obviously isn't just Europe. You could speak to a global level, but maybe focus on Europe some and give us some highlights.
Yeah, looking, of course, the pandemic hit us as well in a certain kind and started in China and came over to Europe and US. In general, looking at the different industries we are serving, we see, of course, a drop in the automotive, aviation, which unfortunately, according some prediction, there's no recovery till 22, 23, something like that. On the other hand, there are some industries which are where demand is increasing, or like medical area where we have certain customer base, and as well like semiconductor. We see semiconductor is strong demand signals in that arena. So it's a kind of leveraged, but overall there is of course a certain drop.
And Dieter, how do you see it?
Well, especially the area of automotive and electronics, I think big mistakes have been made in Europe. because the problems we have today are not just a result of Corona crisis, but they are a problem which arose already 2 years ago. We have seen declining numbers of purchases for new cars. We have seen the diesel disaster, which was caused by the automotive industries themselves. And at the same time, the only market that was growing was a market for SUVs. And what did the German automotive industry do in order to please the American president to prevent heavy taxes to be implied? They moved most of the SUV production to the United States. Yeah? So it was foreseeable that the building or the numbers of new cars being manufactured would have to decline. We have seen that in 2019 already, where Volkswagen rented space on the new airport in Berlin, as this was not going anyhow, to deposit new cars over there. So once in a while, I really wonder how the tier one suppliers to the automotive industry could just go to their suppliers, to the EMS, and give them the same high building programs as before. That was, in my opinion, one of the biggest faults, because the other industries where the EMS manufacturers are supplying to are not that suffering that bad with minus of 20-25%.
So 25% drop in typically in the automotive sector, you think, Dieter?
Yes. What we see at the moment is, first of all, that still everybody who does more than 25% of his EMS work in the automotive industry is still on short work. So that's number one. Those companies which are in manufacturing into the automotive industry with revenue shares of 60 to 70%, they all predict a revenue decline in 2020 by about 20%. And I assume that as there are several companies which I haven't been able to contact so far, as nobody answers the phone, maybe they are all, maybe they shut down the factory in full. I don't know, but I expect those to have a 25% decline in the revenue.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think is typical across the board when you look at across multiple industries? What do you expect in terms of a overall impact in 2020, or is it way too early to say?
It is difficult, first of all, to make prediction if you have only a limited database. I have some database, but I always have to say, be careful with it. And if I mention a number, it's an average number. And we all know you can drown in a river that in average is just 2 feet deep if you happen to fall in one area where it's very deep. So but my prediction at the moment is that in Western Europe, we'll see a decline of about 12% in 2020. You always have to remember the automotive share in Western Europe in the EMS industry is about 20-22%. The East, it will be definitely less for the simple reason we have a lot of very big ODM companies in Eastern Europe, such as Foxconn, Pegatron, Paragon, Jabil, Flex, Inventec, and Wistron, mostly working in the high volume, low mix areas, such as communication and computer industry. And if you look at the computer industry, there is forecasts that due to the Corona crisis, there is a pickup of about 10%. And my calculation was no, in Eastern Europe, it will be zero. It will have the same revenues as the year before. And if I do that, and those low mix, high volume companies account for 58% of the revenues in Eastern Europe. And if I take the remaining 42% at -12 as well, I get out for Europe at -9% in average. But again, there are huge differences. Yeah, I can even tell you a lot of companies who make big profits, but we probably get to that later.
Yeah, there are some interesting results been in just in the last couple of weeks with some EMS companies. Manfred, is it all about demand at the moment? Is it all about the disruption to demand? Because initially there was a supply disruption. It was difficult to get components. There's also the third element of working practices and where you can and can't have your factories at full capacity. Have those issues settled, and we're really concerned just about demand disruption right now?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of all. There, of course, like Dieter just mentioned, there is certain industries we see increasing demands, other industries demands dropped. So even for Zollner, in the average, we are quite confident, but we also still have in some of our areas this short-time work, where this which is supported from the government, and they get a certain percentage of that. And yes, we had supply chain challenges, disruptions, but I think those are not the real issue. I think we all need to look at how does the consumption come back. Because even with the pandemics, with the shutdowns you still have in certain areas globally, like Germany is a exporting country as well. So we still are dependent on that. And so like investment goods, there could still be a drop as maybe certain investments are held back and not done now. So I think there's still a shift and real recovery maybe, but that's an assumption as well, maybe beginning 2021.
Yeah, and a slow recovery and a return to kind of 2019 numbers in 22 or 23, I think is what a lot of people are talking about. Dieter, you're nodding there. Is that when you see that cycle kind of bouncing back to where it is now? In overall, obviously it'll be different in different sectors. Aviation may be slower, automotive may be slower.
Well, I just read an article today about the president of a German association stating that the market was picking up momentum. I don't know which market he meant, definitely not Germany. We are still in the decline. For the big companies, it's less. For the small companies, we are in a situation that could endanger the life of the companies at the moment. So definitely we are not picking up. I see the earliest pickup in end of August, early September, because at this moment of time we have something which in Germany we call the summer hole. And what we see is that several customers of EMS companies, as they have insufficient work, they were on short time work, but now they have implied summer vacation. Only few companies in the past in Germany applied summer vacation. That was typical.
That was a Spain-Italian thing.
It's Italy, Spain, France, but not in Germany. And this year it is changing. We see companies shutting down for 2 or 3 weeks in order to afterwards have sufficient workload to utilize the capacity better. So this summer hole is there at the moment, and I have seen companies reporting last Friday to me decline in order intake by 80% compared to the same period last year. That is dangerous. So, and in total, I see the recovery only happening between 22 and 23 to get to the 2019 levels. And that is confirmed by other surveys done by the German machine industry, VDMA, they have done this with 650 member companies, and the majority of them agree to that, and some 20%, the bigger ones, actually think it's more 2023.
Yeah, so a slow recovery.
Let me follow up. Manfred, you had made a comment just there about the investment, people, their willingness to invest in the industry and do things. But how is that from a company perspective with for the prospect of the downturn and everything? How is it within Zollner? You can speak specifically maybe about investment in new equipment and in new systems and any upgrades in that. That must be impacted in some way.
It's impacted to a certain level. On the other hand, where we saw, and I think the pandemic is a driving anyway, we need to do more and invest more in digitalization. When the pandemic started, we sent home our employees on, really within a few days, so had the tools in place. I think those tools, the digitalization, but as well, not just the communication supply chain, but as well in the production, that is something what we're really focusing on and driving and learning out from the pandemic, that we need to get more momentum in that.
Yeah, so if you look at that digital transformation, and Eric and I have talked about this before, that was happening anyway, and we've been talking about Industry 4.0 for far too long, and we need to be walking the walk and getting stuff done. But with a crisis like this, it tends to be an accelerant. It tends to be something that speeds up change and speeds up transformation. So do we have kind of a double-edged sword there of the desire to digitally transform because it will give us visibility, it'll give us perhaps agility and resilience, but on the other side, it's going to require investment. So, there's a balance required there, isn't there, Manfred?
This is a balance required, of course. On the other hand, like we are at Zollner, we are very diversified, so serving all the different industries. And fortunately, there is not the real demand drop in all industries. So we have industries where we see high demands like semiconductor, medical, of course, driven by kind of ventilators or pulmonary equipment, things like that. We're involved with our customers as well. So that helps us overall, the company, to leverage that a bit. And we always say, why are we diversified? To be more stable, standing on more feet. It's easier than standing just on one feet. And I think that helps us coming through that crisis.
Yeah. So when you look at the investment side of it, obviously CapEx is one part of it. But what we've seen recently, and we've had guests on this show that are in the area of the as a service, the kind of automation as a service or robotics as a service, the kind of stuff that appears on OPEX rather than CapEx. Do you see that as a potential route to digitization that maybe some companies will take because they don't want to do the big capital projects, but they'll do the the projects that are on their operational P&L?
Yeah, you need always to find the right level of investment. What business do you have? Certain companies, they surely made decrease the level on invest in R&D, and this maybe will slow down some automatization driving. But on the other hand, I think that's a chance in the communication. We need to have demand signals amongst the complete entire supply chain, from the supplier till the end customer, or to the customer's end customer even. So we need to invest a lot in that to be more flexible, to be faster, and at the end to be more adaptable. But the same, I think, applies to the production as well. So doing more automatization, what we had till now, we do already a lot at Zollner, but of course there is always room for improvement. Yeah. And we see that that's more necessary than ever.
Yeah, and having that adaptable automation as well, rather than just fixed automation.
Right.
Let me, Dita, we're talking about the impact of, COVID as an accelerant of the trends, and we've been talking about it's also an accelerant of the negative trends too, right? So if you have a bad business model, you're very strained during these times, right? And our EMS industry has had too many players for decades, right? So
Yes.
you and I have spoken before about ones who might be facing that. But so Zollner is a strong, well-run company with a business model, has diversified, who might be able to invest into the digitalization and automation. But smaller companies who are strained and may not be as fortunate, right? What are you seeing?
Well, the problem is, and you remember my speech in Munich last year at Productronica, where I talked about the paradigm change in the EMS industry, that smaller companies would have problems to sustain in this business. I still believe that the coronavirus has accelerated this, and products are getting smaller and smaller. You have 0.1, 0.05 sized products now, and a lot of the smallest don't have the equipment, and now they see their order intake declining, and I do see that when the business picks up slightly in early next year, those companies will have to buy more material. They will have to pay more for the labor, and they just don't have the cash anymore because their equity share is already so low, and no bank will give them any further money. So we'll see a lot of Chapter 11 like situations in Europe. On the other hand, we have to see that there is a shift in the markets. See, if you have a car, at this moment of time, you wouldn't buy a new one if you were on short work and you don't know whether you still have a job tomorrow. So you just don't buy one, and you continue to drive your old one. That means that is business that is lost. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Whereas, for example, like take the other nice example of an article I received from Texas yesterday with the example of toilet paper. Yes, the demand for toilet paper 3 months ago shifted tremendously. Yeah? Mm-hmm. But now, if you go to the shops, there's plenty of toilet paper all over the world. So it was just a peak demand, but yeah. To say so, the demand by the individual people is not getting more all of a sudden. Yeah. So it remains, at the end of the day, it remains the same. It was just a peak demand because people were afraid they wouldn't get anything anymore. Yeah. And that is the difference. Now let's look at the medical industry. We see a lot of pickup in the medical industry at the moment. A lot of products being demanded. I have companies which have 150% more revenues on medical equipment. Well, that's not going to continue. Yeah, there is demand pulled forward. Yeah, it'll slow down again. We shouldn't dream that this will continue at this level. Yeah, so we need to carefully investigate the different markets, and what is even more important, we should do more benchmark. We should look at those companies which are much more profitable, which even in those days have good success, higher revenues, increase their profits. So the question to everybody else has to be, why? How can they do this? This needs to be analyzed.
Yeah. And the last thing, while we're on the markets, a lot of people are talking about shift in geography. A lot of people are talking about reducing dependence, particularly on China for supply chain. Is there a dividend there for Europe? Is there an opportunity for business that was being manufactured in Asia to move to Europe? Manfred, are you seeing your customers saying, hey, we want more diversity in our supply chain, or we want stuff to be close to a consumer?
That's certainly a discussion what we have with some of our customers as well, and I think not even in our customer base, there's a whole discussion going on looking at the pandemic, which made us all thinking: do we have the right supply chain? Do we have single source? Do we have a dual or multiple source? In what region are we manufacturing? And I think there will be some shifts also, like production will be split to maybe Europe, US or Asia. Not for everything, of course, wherever that could be possible. And I think in terms of risk management, that's surely discussions which continue and will surely have effect in supply chains.
Yeah, and I guess from your point of view, it's important that you are in all of those major geographies like Europe, the Americas, both in North America and Central America, and obviously in Asia as well. And I think, you know, when I look at Zollner and I've visited a lot of your factories, there's a consistency there. So I can see that, you know, a job that's manufactured in Milpitas can move to Costa Rica, or from Costa Rica to Zant, and from Zant to China, or wherever it needs to move to create that resilience. I don't think a lot of companies have that. Certainly not the smaller ones.
No, surely, and that's important, that we give ourselves and of course our customer the flexibility to move where the real demand is, and always take into consideration what risks we are going. So what makes sense most, and I think we all learned out from the pandemic a lot. So I think pandemic will still be in our mind in the next few years for sure, and even longer. And I think this will always drive decisions for supply chain localization, globalization as well.
Now, the localization of the actual manufacturing, but how is it with if there have been any challenges or issues with the component supply base, which mostly still comes from Asia?
We had some challenges to overcome, of course. There were some countries where we get goods out, which had a lockdown. But currently, in terms of the supply chain components, we don't see an issue currently. So that's smooth. And I think it's also due to the decreasing demand in some industries. So currently, I think this should be well situated. And of course, like Dieter mentioned about the vacation time, where German companies never had vacation times the last 20, 25 years or whatever. Now we have some vacation times due to the short-term time work and so on. Sure. I'm afraid a little that maybe people going to vacation, Europe is a kind of more and more open. People go to vacation, and I hope that we don't get don't get a second wave with the COVID-19. So hopefully that the vacation everyone can enjoy, and we don't have another lockdown.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point there, Manfred, which is that we're managing a crisis that we don't know where we are on the curve of that crisis. We're talking about recovery, but we don't know if we're at the bottom or, we're starting to move out, and we don't know what the next bump in the road is going to be. And then finally, we don't know what the next crisis will be. So, if we look back the last 20 years, there's been some kind of volcano, flood, Fukushima, whatever else, almost every year, almost as many crises as there have been years. So we have to plan for the next one and not know without knowing what it is. And that's about having systems in place and having visibility. And that's part of that digital transformation process, I guess.
Right. So that's part of that, and also a driver, because the challenge need to be that we have the ability to be adaptable to crises which might come up, to supply chain issues and so on. And with that, along with that, also having the communication tools in place to have the signals, whether on the customer side, whether on the supplier side, easily available everywhere where we need it.
Yeah, I think it was Darwin that said it's the survival of the most adaptable rather than the survival of the fittest, which I think is the often misquoted Dieter, do you think some of those companies that are in danger are the least adaptable in the industry, or are they just the, you know, is there a particular size? Are there characteristics to those companies that you see as being at risk?
Well, let me first of all say something about the component suppliers. Still, a lot of component, especially for the smaller EMS, are being supplied via distributors. We see a lot of consolidation in this market. We see companies merging. And I just visited a smaller EMS on Monday, and he showed me some of his problems which arose during the time 2 years ago when we had a shortage of components. And he said, well, what the distributors did, they had a reel of 5,000 resistors, for example, and they cut this in strips of 1,000 each and supplied the smaller companies each with 1,000 resistors, so at least they could manufacture some of their products. And when somebody ordered 1,050 resistors, for example, he got a reel with 1,000, and then he got a strip of 50, which causes him a lot of additional work on the shop floor. So I think when the supplier market is consolidating, a lot of companies will say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And small companies will suffer from getting components, yeah, because let's be realistic, at the end of the day, yes, it's a nice gesture to the smaller ones, but at the end of the day, it helps nobody, yeah. So that's another reason why we'll see smaller EMS companies vanishing as well. Yeah, we still have this problem that most of the components come from Asia. Yeah, I can't see any chance of changing that again.
Yeah, and you see the small companies as the most exposed to risk at the moment.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
You know,
and do you think some of those will get swallowed up, or become part of groups, or do you see consolidation, or do you just see them going out of the market?
No, I see consolidation. There's a lot of discussion about mergers and acquisitions. Everybody, in actual fact, in them approached nearly every day, because I have this huge database of nearly 2,200 EMS companies in Europe. And people call me and say, well, we are looking for a company in a special revenue range. Can you supply us with a long list? And do you have additional information? And I do have additional information for the facts that I have analysis of most of the balance sheets, especially in the German-speaking countries. So yes, there is a lot of activity in mergers and acquisitions. And in 10 years from now, we'll have many more European companies with revenues of more than 500 million euros.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Yeah. I just recall an interview that, Phil, you and I did one of these shows a month ago with a gentleman from TTI, and we're talking about the supply base, and he said, listen, you know, getting more capacity, it was a challenge before, and we'll probably end up coming back to that. So, you know, hopefully during these times, you know, they're doing some investment, the component manufacturers, whether that moves from China or where more develop in other areas, I don't know. Something just happened to my light here, excuse me. But it'll be interesting to see, you know, because I think that component side is still, you know, potentially an Achilles heel industry moving forward, especially as they ramp up. And as you're indicating here, maybe that's 2022, 23 before we get back to where 2019 is. So hopefully they can do something in the meantime. So.
Yeah, I think some companies will have realized that there are specific components, specific component families and groups that are exposed to a lack of redundancy and a lack of bandwidth in their in the supply chain. So I think there's some changes there. Hey Manfred, I was thinking just on another front. You're in charge of sales and marketing. How's sales and marketing when you can't leave the house to go visit your customers? That's a challenge right now, I guess.
Yes. That's a challenge. So there was not too much travels and visits to customers recently. What I see currently, so at least within Europe currently, travel restrictions have fallen. So my team is making step by step more and more travels, visiting customers, talking about projects. But of course, during the situation of the lockdowns and so on, I think it was important to stay in close contact to the customers, to the existing customer base, and of course, using more than ever the digital tools we needed to have during that situation, for sure. And I hope that situations will be getting better globally as well, because currently Europe is loosening the restrictions more and more. So I hope that we overcome in a certain way the pandemic, that we at least have certain travels, of course, keeping in mind the hygienical requirements we surely have everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So I guess you've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings and a lot of using
Zoom
using
meeting,
those
team
tools
meetings,
to get to speak to people. Yeah,
using all that tools, and which we implemented very fast. We didn't have in that extent in the past, but we reacted fortunately with our team very fast and implemented all that tools to be able to communicate and discuss with the customer.
But there may be a benefit to the pandemic then, that you have captured audiences, right? You're stuck at home, but so are all the other people, right? So they may have more time on their hands to take a call and.
Yes and no. Because all were hit from the pandemic, and they also might have short-term work or lockdowns in certain ways or certain reasons. So, and of course had certain priorities to work on. So just using the digital tools does not mean that you get everyone on the phone or video or whatever. So it's still not easy, because there are certain priorities, and that's depending on the companies. And like Dieter mentioned, consolidation, you asked him about consolidation. That's always dependent on the companies, how big they are, in what field they are, what industries they are serving. And so it's all certain dependencies. And that's different from company to company.
Yeah. So when you throw this whole thing forward to 2022 or 2023, and this for both Dieter and Manfred, how different do you see the European industry being, not just in terms of its size and its number of companies, but the way those companies operate? Maybe Dieter, you can give us your kind of 30,000 feet view.
Well, looking 2 to 3 years at this moment of time is very difficult. As Manfred earlier said, we don't know whether there is going to be a second wave, whether it's going to hit us hard, whether it's just a short interruption. Those are unpredictabilities at the moment, which make it very difficult to make very clear predictions. I think that travel will be reduced, which has pros and cons. The pros being for the environment, the cons being for many companies in the travel business suffering a lot, which gives us other economy problems which cannot easily be solved. In regards to home office, I hope that the home office will return to a much lower level at the moment. Even so, I think, yes, some home office might be nice. For example, if you were able to work 1 day a week from home, that might be helpful. But on the other hand, I remember when we started the lockdown in Germany over here, and on a Monday afternoon, normal working time, I just thought I'd go to a garden center and buy some plants, and I wouldn't believe this place was more crowded than ever before. And I thought, hey guys, you are all supposed to be in home office working, but instead they were not working, they were doing private stuff. And I just saw statistics that the amount of garbage from households during the lockdown period was jumping up due to the fact that everybody was cleaning out his house, saying, oh, I don't need that anymore, throw it away. Yeah. So all of that, and I had many EMS companies as well complaining with me about the fact that they couldn't reach their counterpart at the customer to talk about the supplies, to talk about the orders, as those companies, as those people were not available. Some of them even complaining about the fact that they were called during working time as if they were called during vacation.
During private
Home
time.
office is not vacation. People need to realize that, and if they overdo it, definitely the companies will turn it back to a standard working time at the office.
Yeah, and all those buyers are out at the garden center.
Yeah, but that's a transition too with home office, is that you're managing outcome, not time, right? So, and for a lot of companies, especially old bureaucratic companies, they manage time. They need you, and that's not just this industry, that's in many industries, right? They want you there your 8 hours, whatever it is, and you may be very inefficient for 8 hours, but damn it, you're at your desk for 8 hours, right?
Yeah.
Being at your home office, it's really about results and your contribution.
Yeah, so I think it's a different thing. Manfred, when you look at the kind of EMS company that is fit for the future, what's your vision as you look forward to that recovery period? What kind of company do you think, or what kind of EMS company do you have to be to fulfill those requirements of adaptability, agility, resilience, to support these large brands and to support your customers?
Yeah, so first to Dieter, I don't like home office either, but it helped keeping the distance, reacting very fast with the people. So I think it helped, and Zollner having around 11,500 people and just having maybe a few incidents, I think that shows that we reacted really in the right way and fast. On the other hand, exactly those tools, being flexible, like we did in a few days, send people home, having all the tools in place that they could work at home, were still very productive. So this helps to need to have the tools in place. We also, to be adaptable for the future, is the right tools in the whole supply chain. So to get the demand signals, supply signals, to know what parts, components are available, how can you react, how can you drive your production lots for the different requirements. So all that communication tool is very important. And on the other hand, it's important to have a kind of complete overview, where like we having our PLM system, our manufacturing execution system, to have the data connected and to have the data available where you need the data, and having the right tools, the communication tools, to give the customer more insight in the future. I think that's the important topics to cover.
Yeah, so I think data, you see data as playing a huge role. And I think during the crisis, we've exposed those that have been data haves and data have-nots. And, you know, if you haven't got the visibility and you can't see what's going on, then actually managing any kind of change, let alone a disruptive crisis like this, is very, very difficult. So data is obviously fundamentally important.
Listen, I'm aware of the time here, so we need to wrap, but I thought that, you know, we've talked some about kind of what the future might hold and how you're seeing the recovery and what have you. So maybe to touch on that just a little bit more in closing, is there any kind of advice, and I know Dieter, you're always big with advice on based on data, you know, what would you recommend to companies, especially in Europe, on how to manage through the next few years?
There are two advices. One is a hard one, which one can do easily themselves. Have a look at those companies who at the moment were able to increase their revenues, were able to increase their profits. In this specific case, I just mentioned two companies who just published their half-year results for 2020. For the first half year, one is Kitron in Norway, one is Node AS in Sweden. Those companies were able to increase their revenues by 14.7 and 15.7% respectively. They do a net profit after tax of 5.7 and the other one I think is 5.2%. And I think have a look at the internet. You can reach out on these things, try to understand the numbers and get people together to discuss what one can learn from this. That is one thing. The other thing is, as I am on the phone all day long trying to talk with EMS companies, I can only recommend to people, pick up the phone. Yeah, I could have been a customer placing a really big order with you. It's incredible that once in a while I need to have the phone ring for 4 or 5 minutes before somebody dares to pick up the phone. And then you get an apprentice at the phone who says, well, I don't know, they're all in a meeting. Yeah, I could be a customer. Yeah. People need to realize the S in EMS stands for service, yeah? And people need to deliver that service, otherwise they should go out of business. That's my simple recommendation, and I get really angry if nobody picks up the phone. In my company, I used to have a very clear phone rule. If a salesperson didn't pick up the phone after the third ring, he was fired. Yeah. Yeah. I think in those cases, we need to have some more strict measures. We are service companies and we need to behave like service companies. Yeah.
Okay. Good
so
advice.
Manfred, you get to follow that. So what would you like to say? I mean, what would your advice be as far as?
Like Dieter said, we don't have that strict rules, but that's important. Where we have certain systems in place that we are sure if a customer is calling, the phone is picked up immediately and we talk to the customer. Yes, but giving an advice. So we talked about already when Phil asked a certain question, what needs to be that you can adapt to the future needs or to the crisis, whatever. To give an advice, it's hard because it's dependent. What markets are you serving? Mm-hmm. What industries are you serving? How big you are? So I think each and every company needs to find its own way or find certain niches. On the other hand, benchmark is very important to see what are others doing, what are they adapting. On the other hand, that's always a back view. So you need to look in the future as well, what new tools are there, how can I help, how can I increase the value to our customer? And I think that's a question everyone should have in mind when talking to a customer, when providing solutions to their customers. That's important, to really value and have the customer view, like Dieter said, picking up the phone when it rings immediately.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you talk about picking up the phone, but I think more broadly it's communication, isn't it? It's having that open, honest communication with your customer, having the data so when they call and say, what's going on here, you've got that data available to them, Manfred. It's really about having that fierce collaboration between you and your customers and that very open line and channel of communication that is always there regardless of what crisis is occurring in the outside world.
Yeah, very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time today to speak with us, to share your insights and comments on the industry. For those of you who have listened in, thank you for your time. I remind you that this will be broadcast on EMS Now. We'll publish it probably within the week. Well, we only have 2 days left this week. Maybe we'll see when it gets out. By the beginning of next week, for sure. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. I wish you health, happiness, and good business out there.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Stay safe, everybody. Take care.